Hi, I'm Stephen Garvey, founder, leader of National Citizens Alliance, NCA. Tonight, we're going to look deeper into who are the globalists in Canada at the federal level government. Our focus tonight is on globalist conservative Rempel. We're going to present the facts tonight, and so you can make better decisions. But as a party, we are pro-Canadian, anti-globalists. We will call out all globalists. We don't care what color they are, whether it doesn't matter what gender they are. We're going to call them out. And tonight we're going to call out Rempel. She needs to be called out. We think she's just a little charlatan, kind of like a mini Faith Goldie type person. She's just peddling a bunch of lies and misinformation and a lot of non-information. There's no specifics. So we're going to call her out. We're going to draw attention to her ties to globalists, like the World Economic Forum and that type of thing, and also ties to UN Agenda 2030, 21. So we're going to bring this all to light. We're going to start here. This is an image that we had up here. And this is at Rempel 2016. She was recognized as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum, which is tied to the UN, World Bank, IMF, the Rothschilds. The World Economic Forum is a total globalist organization. They're pushing climate change agenda, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. So this is very concerning. This is a big red flag that they would actually recognize her. It shows that she has some real globalist ties to them, which isn't surprising. But we're going to dwell on that later in the presentation. And I'm going to bring up this article here. She was attacking Trudeau because he was at Davos. He spent money there. And she said, quote, "I think you have to be cognizant of your appearance here and how much you're spending here and that sort of stuff, because there are a lot of people in Canada who look at this and go, we're in a lot of debt, we're paying a lot of taxes. Yeah, okay, Rempel. We've heard that 100 times from you, but let's look at the facts. You're bullshitting Canadians. The globalist conservatives historically are the least fiscally responsible. That is a fact, federally. So you're bullshitting people. You're lying. Peddling that lie. So let's look at the facts. So this is a meme we had up earlier this week. Some people didn't like it because they don't like the facts. But the fact is, from 1968 to 2018, globalist conservatives have added $244 billion more debt than globalist liberals. $244 billion more to our federal debt. The total federal debt since 1968 is $663.8 billion. And to understand this federal debt, you are paying, your taxes go to the debt service payment to these banks. That's how you're impacted, you and your family. It means higher taxes on your family. And right now, $64 billion a year goes to these banks in debt service payments nationally. But can you believe the facts? Here it is right here. I'm going to bring it up in another form. The federal debt from 1870 to 1967, there was only $14.2 billion federal debt. These liberals and conservatives were doing a good job then, and then they went off the rails. Globalist liberals since 1968, $214.9 billion added to the federal debt. Globalist conservatives from 1968 onward, $458.9 billion added to the federal debt. And as I mentioned, the total federal debt from 1968, these globalist liberals and conservatives combined have added $663.8 billion to the federal debt. This is a fact. This is a fact. So when Rempel talks about fiscal responsibility, She is lying to you. She is lying to you. That's it. Call her Liar Rempel, because that's what she is. She's a liar. These globalist conservatives are criminally, fiscally irresponsible. Look at that. $458 billion added to the federal debt since 1968. They need to be flushed down the toilet. They've lost their way. We're running against them, so support us if you support fiscal responsibility. I'm going to get further into this. I'm gonna play a couple of videos here to give you some insight on Rempel, and then I'm going to provide commentary on them. So here's Rempel going on about the UN Global Compact. I'm going to talk about this a bit further. There's a lot of stuff she doesn't say, and what she does say is quite interesting. So here's a little snippet for you.
Former Conservative government under Prime Minister Harper, Immigration Minister Jason Kenney, we had an orderly, fair system that matched the needs of the Canadian economy with our immigration policy that ensured that Canadians had first access at jobs, that when we were bringing humanitarian immigration or immigrants to Canada, that they were the world's most vulnerable people, and that we were budgeting for their integration in the context of a balanced budget, lower taxes for Canadians, and ensuring that Canadians' needs were met, because there's many Canadians.
Okay, there's that snippet, but there's a lot in there. She talks about, quote, orderly, fair system. It sounds good on the surface, but orderly by who? By these globalist conservatives in Ottawa or globalist liberals. That's the fact. Who is it fair to? She doesn't say. There's no specifics. She lies again. She talks about how the globalist conservatives are balancing budget. This is a complete lie. From 2005 to 2015, they maybe balanced one budget in 2015. Maybe. And there's a lot of people who think they just fudged the books. But from 2005 to 2014, they didn't balance a single budget. So she's just lying straight to your face. She talks about lower taxes. Harper lowered GST slightly, but we have to be fair. The Liberals lowered the business tax from 10.5 to 9%. The taxes really haven't changed between them. So she's lying there. And what's this? She says Canadians have first access to jobs? That's a lie. There's no specifics there. And I'm going to show you the specifics. And then she talks about humanitarian immigration. And that type, you know, we aren't going to bring the most needed in the world. She talks about low skilled workers, and rambling on. But I'm going to get into that in the second video. But I'll play the second video for you.
Low-skilled temporary foreign worker program to achieve the following objectives: ensuring that Canadians get the first crack at jobs in our country, that wage distortion and worker abuse are prevented, that industry groups who have legitimate need of the program face reduced barriers to receive labor, and most importantly, to allow those who enter Canada as low-skilled workers a permanent path to residency. We feel this reform is needed to allow those who are currently using Canada's asylum system to enter Canada for economic reasons a clear alternative path to enter Canada that is focused on integration and self-sufficiency, and to allow our asylum system to be focused on those who are facing legitimate persecution. It is also important to show fairness to the foreign workers who run our farms and care for our children, that they have priority access into our immigration system and permanent residency, as opposed to those who are currently crossing at Roxham Road. Dissembling the permanency of Canada's new immigration program at Roxham Road by closing the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement, and perhaps going further by discussing if Canada should enter into discussions with G7 countries on a global Safe Third Country system. This is already happening to a certain extent agreement in Europe with the Dublin Agreement renegotiation. Revamping Canada's resettlement services to better support immigration to and retention in rural communities. Establishing a program of more formal ties with provincial governments to ensure that immigration meets provincial labour needs and doesn't provide strain on provincial social programs. Reforming Canada's refugee resettlement programs to prioritize government-sponsored spaces victims of the four atrocity crimes, and to encourage and facilitate greater use of the privately sponsored refugee program because of its better and more successful integration outcomes. We would also push for reform within the United Nations to better allow resettlement response to internally displaced persons to prevent the failure of the global community to the Yazidis of Iraq from occurring again, and we would ensure that Canada uses its legislative authority to do so within our own programs if the international community won't. Looking at new programs to expedite the reunion of the family of members of genocide survivors who have resettled to Canada. Establishing a new mechanism to oversee the immigration consultant profession to prevent fraud. Again, these are just but a few measures.
So there's Rempel there. You probably noticed that she just rambles on and on with no specifics. No specifics at all. And she's going on about low-skilled workers, a temporary foreign worker program. Interesting, she talks about the Safe Third Country Agreement, closing this loophole. But both globalist liberals and globalist conservatives say they're still going to accept asylum cases from people crossing the border illegally from the U.S. That is a fact. NCA will not accept a single asylum case, but they still will accept them. This is obscene. And then she talks about going to the G7, which is a globalist institution, and pushing for a global safe third country agreement. But they're still going to accept asylum cases. She's talking about, did you catch the one where she said there, oh, we're going to bring immigration to the rural areas, like Doug Ford is doing with the federal government right now. They're all in bed together. Doug Ford is funding a pilot project to bring migrants to rural Ontario. Did you know that? She's supporting the privately sponsored refugee program, which is linked to George Soros. George Soros is involved in that program. Unbelievable. And then she supports resettlement through the crooked, amoral UN, pushing for global resettlement through the UN. But I'm going to go through this other specific things right now. I made a detailed list here, and we're just going to run through it so you have the facts. As you notice, she just rambles on and rambles on, no specifics. Both globalist conservatives and the other mainstream parties will continue to support asylum cases from the U.S. And guess what? They don't give any specific numbers. Rempel says she disagrees with the fake refugee claims using up public funds. But then she supports, along with the globalist conservatives, using those funds to pay for more so-called regular migration. And this is the mass immigration coming into Canada. The open borders, the mass immigration. And I'm going to get further into that. Rempel claims that white supremacy is a big problem taking a place around the world and in Canada and needs to be addressed. But she doesn't provide any examples of it in Canada. And she calls parties like NCA dangerous. Can you believe it? Those are facts. She pretends that there are strong differences between the mainstream parties on immigration numbers when there are not. And she never talks about specific numbers. The NCA supports 50,000 or less total immigration per year. These globalist conservatives do not give you a number. Why? What are they hiding? What are they hiding? She says nothing about the replacement of Canada's traditional population, which is occurring through the sustained mass immigration which started in the 1990s. She doesn't even talk about replacement. Does that mean she supports it? She supports mass immigration, so it's safe to assume she supports the replacement of Canada's traditional population, and so does the globalist conservatives by extension. She blames liberals for the immigration mess when the globalist conservatives are fully complicit in it. And I will back this up right here. Under globalists, Harper's historic mass immigration, it was historic, of around 280,000 a year per year on average. They came from 190 countries, with Philippines, India, China, Islamic Republic of Iran, and Pakistan in the top 5 immigrant source countries. Harper had historic foreign aid outflow that matches Trudeau. He also had high illegal migration of up to 37,000 in 1 year, crossing from the US border. In 2007, the Harper regime processed 35,000 asylum cases. In 2011, the Harper regime processed 25,315 asylum cases. In 2016, the Trudeau regime processed 23,870 asylum cases. There's a lot of Canadians who don't know that. But under Harper, there was pretty profound illegal migration coming up from the US border. Not as high as Trudeau now, but it was still pretty high. 35,000 asylum cases in 2007. 2011, over 25,000. Those are the facts. So, and if we dig deeper here, this Rempel, she's been going on like a robot about illegal migration for the last year. But a lot of Canadians don't realize is that this illegal migration, which is terrible and easy to fix, is only 1/10 of the immigration into Canada. 9/10 is mass immigration. And this mass immigration is the main cause of the replacement of Canada's traditional population. It's also causing the attacks on Canada's traditional identity, heritage, cultural norms, and it's all connected to the post-national state. So she could blame Trudeau all she wants, but her and the Harper regime have their fingerprints all over this, without question. Those are the facts. And if we dig deeper, she says, like all these globalist conservatives and liberals, even the globalist Bernier, they all say immigration is good for the economy. That's what they say. Look it up. While they ignore the economic, environmental, and societal impacts of mass immigration. And I'll give you an example of some of them. You'll never get this from a Rempel because she just rambles on with no specifics. But right now, the newcomers to Canada, it's costing $40 billion taxation negative a year. That means the newcomers coming in, they are consuming more services than taxes paid to the tune of $40 billion a year. There are less jobs and more people in Canada. The wages are getting lower. Canada is getting overpopulated. As mentioned, Canada's traditional population is being replaced. There's housing crisis in Toronto, Vancouver, largely due to immigration. There's depletion of farmland due to pressures from immigration. There's stress on wildlife. There's wildlife habitat loss due to immigration. There's stress on ecosystems. There's an expansion of and increased ethnic enclaves and colonies in Canada. This is a fact. There's erosion of Canada's identity, heritage, and cultural norms. You will never get this from a Rempel, right? You heard her. She doesn't talk about these real issues. Why isn't she talking about them? Why doesn't she give us numbers? Because she's in bed with the globalist establishment, and they have an agenda of mass immigration, which is tied to the UN Agenda 2030 and the transformation of Canada. That is a fact. They're all in bed together. And there's more issues. She's supporting the temporary foreign worker program. They want to bring more cheap labor into Canada and undercut the Canadian worker. That is a fact. They support the chain migration. She never talks about it. And chain migration is where you bring in your mother, your father, your aunt, your uncle, your grandparents. And guess what? These people come in. Some of them don't integrate. They end up on welfare. Then they get into our CPP. They get into our OAS. And they start living off Canada's social system. That is a fact. That is a fact. They also get into the GIS as well. And we showed that up to $26,000 a year. She doesn't talk about it. And then we got the radical extremists coming into Canada. She doesn't talk about that and how we need to have proper screening to prevent them coming in. NCA supports ideological screening. None of these mainstream parties support that. She doesn't even talk about it. It's, under Harper, the Edmonton terrorist with the U-Haul, that terrorist thug was rejected by the U.S. and let in under Harper. Can you believe it? And yet Rempel blames the current government for all this mess. Those are the facts. In 2016, the World Economic Forum added Rempel to the globalist class of young global leaders. This is a fact, and here it is here. This World Economic Forum is 100% globalist to the core. It's funded by the UN and all its offshoots and entities. It's connected to the Rothschilds, the World Bank, the IMF, you name it, George Soros, Bill Gates, on and on. And it pushes big time climate change agenda, UN Agenda 21 and UN Agenda 2030, which Harper adopted in 2015. And here's Rempel here. So why would they add her if she wasn't a globalist little shill? Why would they add her? She never talks about UN Agenda 2030, ever. Just like her friend Faith Goldie. Never about UN Agenda 21, which Mulroney adopted. UN Agenda 2030, Harper adopted. Why is that? She says she's against the Migration Pact. The Migration Pact is aligned to UN Agenda 2030. UN Agenda 2030 is aligned to UN Agenda 21. UN Agenda 2030 is being implemented on all levels of government in Canada, and it's about the radical transformation of our country. She never talks about it. Why? Is she a globalist shill? And the icing on the cake, I guess, is Rempel is on the Privy Council, which is part of Canada's deep state. The Privy Council is a shadow government. And guess what? She's on it. But they're all in bed together. We're not singling out the globalist conservatives. We're just focusing on different globalists, and she happens to be one of them. They're all working together. It's all part of the same globalist conglomerate. NCA stands in full opposition to all globalists. So we ask you a simple question. Will you stand with NCA 2019 in opposition to all these globalist shills, including Rempel, who are destroying Canada, who are manipulating you and your family, who are criminally stealing your money? Look at the debt. These globalist conservatives since 1968, 458 billion squandered, added to debt, which you are paying for. They have to be drained and replaced. This is a big political theater, a big game. Divide left, right, liberal, conservative. You're getting ripped off. This country is going down the tubes. And we call on you to join NCA today. Make a pledge to make a difference in 2019 by signing up today at nationalcitizensalliance.ca. Become a volunteer, become a candidate, become a member. We are dependent on the Canadian people. We cannot do it all ourselves. At the end of the day, we need the support of the Canadian people. The more support, the more success we will have, the more success you will have, you and your family. So we hope this was informative. Please share the message. This is about our future, our children, their children. This nonsense cannot continue. Thank you very much.